Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Director of Community Education at the McLean County Museum of History, and I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. We could not have programs like today's without support from the community, our members, and people just like you. If you enjoyed today's program and want to help the museum continue to host quality educational programs like this one, please consider becoming a member if you're not already, or making a donation by following the link that I'm going to drop in the chat box. And that will help continue to support our programs and our museum. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I would like to go over to the format for today's program. We will be recording today's program so that people who cannot join us now can watch it later, or if you want to watch it again, you can find it on our YouTube page and on Facebook. If you have a question for our speaker, please submit it in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of the program. If you're having a technical issue, say with sound, please drop a comment in the chat box and I will see if I can resolve the issue for you. With that, I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Bill Kemp, who will present tonight's program on Pitfalls and Promise, Memorializing McLean County's Past. Bill is the museum's librarian and has been with the museum since 2003. In addition to his tireless work in the library and archives, he's a regular contributor to the museum's Sunday column, Pieces from Our Past. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Bill Kemp.
Thank you, Candace, for that nice introduction. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to just jump right into it. I think that's what everybody's here for. In the next hour or so, and I've timed this, so I hope to be within an hour, we will take some measure of how McLean County has chosen to remember the past in the form of statues and monuments and historic markers and plaques and the like. But rather than make lofty pronouncements and sweeping historical judgments, my goal here, I think, is to showcase, for better and for worse, a handful of local sites. But as I do, we should keep in mind these questions. For example, 1, who decides who or what is officially memorialized? 2, how have these decisions been made in the past? I'm not going to address these directly, but I want you to be thinking about these as we go through these slides. 3rd, what do we owe the past? And what do we owe those who have sought to interpret the past for us? I know those are heady things for sure. And last, how can communities like Bloomington Normal, like McLean County, like smaller communities like LeRoy, or wherever, ensure historical rigor, transparency, openness, and inclusion when seeking to commemorate their own particular pasts? In a way, this should be a people's history, right? Community history. You, as a resident of Bloomington, or for example, LeRoy again, or wherever, should feel that you have a stake in what should get memorialized in our public spaces. That shouldn't be the mayor's decision alone, or some rich guys, but a wide representation of the community. And I think it's vital that communities, governmental bodies, activists, etc., approach this issue with the complexity and nuance, nuance it really demands. The death of George Floyd and the rise of the Black Lives Matter activism. Yes, thank you. The death of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter activism has led to really a long overdue dialogue and an examination of what gets cast in bronze and plunked down in a park with a stamp of approval that says, here is a past worth remembering. Last summer's activism has showed us what we already knew, that history, at least our understanding of the past, is often a reflection more of the present. Our concerns, our priorities, our hopes, and our fears than that of the past itself, real or imagined. So we deal both in the past, but also assuredly in the present. The Chicago Monuments Project has called for the review of 41 monuments in the city, including, most controversially, 5 statues of Abraham Lincoln. By review, the city Monuments Project means for the city to reconsider symbols that have become, quote, a focal point for conversation, protest, and activism. Review doesn't mean taking down, at least not yet. But this is not a Chicago thing alone, nor should it be. There's a grassroots movement in Edwardsville, for instance, to remove a statue of Ninian Edwards, third governor of Illinois and the city's namesake. Short of removal, some support the addition of a plaque to provide additional context, the full scope of Edwards' life and career, if you will. A co-leader of an organization that wants the statue moved said, quote, all the statue really talks about is that Edwards was a founding political leader and a governor of Illinois in the 1800s. It completely whitewashes that he was a slave owner who actively encouraged the continuation of slavery. I think most of us would agree that is a part of the Edwards story as well. Locally, Illinois State University removed the names of 10 former U.S. Secretaries of State, which for many years had designated the floors in Waterson Towers. 8 out of these 10 Secretaries of State were involved in slavery. Quote, these names carry the weight of our nation's past that was literally built on the racist system of slavery, ISU President Larry Dietz said last July when announcing the decision. So those are just some of the current issues that institutions, that communities are grappling with. Okay, time is running short, so let's move on to the slides. In the summer of 1730, not 1830, not 1930, southeast of Aerosmith in eastern McLean County, a combined force of French soldiers and native allies laid siege to a large number of Meskwaki, commonly known as the Fox people or Red Earth people. A 3-week standoff then culminated in a September 9th massacre of 500 or more Meskwaki, including a large number of women and children. The Meskwaki did not reside in central Illinois, but they were rather fleeing the French Empire, which was waging a war of extermination against them. This is really the first recorded, that is, written event in what would become McLean County. McLean County is still 90 years away. The fort under siege, it wasn't really a fort, consisted of hastily constructed wooden palisades, burrows, and trenches, and made use of the natural landscape, the adjacent Sangamon River, and timber. This map is the work of the chief military engineer of New France and was created 2 months after the siege. This event is remembered with this engraved boulder, which was unveiled in September 1951. This was the work of William Brigham, a local educator. He was the longtime county superintendent of schools, a historian, and an amateur archaeologist who, like many of his type in the early and middle 20th century, had a fascination with Native American history. Yes, this fascination was genuine, it was earnest and productive, but it could be on occasion a mite misguided or misinformed. So you're probably wondering, etnatique, and we're told it rhymes with weak, right? It's an Algonquin word meaning, quote, the place of the clubbing, or perhaps, quote, where a fight, battle, or clubbing took place. We're not really sure. The name doesn't date to the French nor to the indigenous people that were there. That dates to the 1880s. If not a little bit earlier, and likely came from Bloomington resident J.H. Burnham, who, like Brigham, was an amateur archaeologist with a fascination with Native American history and plenty of legend and lore. So that name really, in some respects, is a made-up name. Let us now move forward in time, nearly a century, to the establishment of the state of Illinois, 1818, right? We had our bicentennial 3 years ago now in 2018. Well, let's focus in or hone in on this map, and we'll see present day McLean County. There's no McLean County yet in 1880, right? That will not come until late 1830. Yet there's a notable village at the edge of this timbered rise northeast of present day LeRoy. Unlike the Illinois Confederation, the Kickapoo avoided political and cultural collapse. They consistently opposed forced removal and acculturation, and by doing so helped ensure their survival into the 21st century. I'm going to go back to the map. At the time of this map, a survey placed the population of the what became known as the Grand Village of the Kickapoo, which was not occupied year-round, but rather seasonally, at 2,000 to 3,000. The survey also indicated the village environs included some 5,000 grave sites. Okay, so today there is a 2-acre tract of park ground at the village site, and that now serves as a focal point in efforts to memorialize this story and the ties of the Kickapoo to this particular stretch of Illinois. An annual powwow was once held here by the Kickapoo and other indigenous peoples, but that hasn't occurred for several years now, but there is hope to revive this practice soon. This is an Illinois State Historical Society marker. It's a rather straightforward overview that still holds up pretty well today. It was sponsored by the Illinois History Club of Lexington High School, so that's kind of neat, and dedicated in 1999. Illinois State Historical Society Executive Director Bill Furry told me last week that there are around 600 state historical society markers. They're kind of the gold standard in the way of signage such as this. Bill said there's about 600, quote, give or take 10. I like that. Last summer, the State Society sought sponsorship for 10 new historical markers commemorating people, places, or events relating to the story of African Americans in Illinois. So there's this marker, and there's another view of it back in January 2019. I like to get out there as much as I can. It's a beautiful site at the eastern edge of what used to be Old Town Timber, one of the largest timber tracts in McLean County, just on the ridge line of the Bloomington Moraine. So you get a beautiful view of the surrounding countryside. That's the very reason why the Kickapoo were there, right? A 2-acre tract of park ground at the village site. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm behind myself. In May of 1998, there was the dedication of the actual 2-acre park grounds, and this boulder kind of commemorates that event. So we have a statement by tribal elder John Kikaski on one side, and a list of patrons and volunteers who made the park a reality back in the late 1990s. And Elder Kikaski, there's a little statement by him, quote, "This park is dedicated to those ancestors which lived and died here, a great nation that once called this place home." There's even another marker, right? This one was dedicated in 2010 by the Illinois State Society, National Society of the Colonial Dames. That's a mouthful, right? But it reads in part, and this is, I think, a worthwhile statement, "It is our mission to preserve this land, share the history of the people who lived here, and to ensure that these grounds will remain witness to Native American culture." Yet the oldest Grand Village of the Kickapoo marker is not even in the present Grand Village of the Kickapoo site. It's actually a half a mile or more away in the middle of privately owned farmland, and it's not available for visits or tourists, if you will. Luckily, last year the field was planted in soybeans, so you could spot the marker. If it's planted in feed corn, you're going to have no such luck, right? It was dedicated, this marker, by the McLean County Historical Society. That's my employer, though we go by the name of McLean County Museum of History now, way back in 1905, more than a century ago. And then archaeological work was conducted near this marker in this field back in the 1970s. The museum actually owns the 33 by 33 foot parcel of land in West Township upon which this marker stands. And there was a tax assessment question last fall, so I had to go out there and take a look. Hence, we have these photographs. The marker reads, "Site of a stockaded Kickapoo Indian fort." Well, therein lies a problem, right? Stockade and fort are likely inaccurate. The wooden palisade didn't serve as a defensive barrier in all likelihood to keep enemies out, but rather as an enclosure for horses, as the Kickapoo managed a large herd here, right? Borrowing, as they did, from other native people and from Euro-American settlers. This marker is actually closer to the true center of the Grand Village of the Kickapoo than the park itself. But the park itself is still a very suitable location to memorialize and remember the Kickapoo. And there we see the Kickapoo Fort Monument, so called, around 1905 when it was erected, and then today. So we're going to now jump to the community of LeRoy, just a few miles away. In the center of LeRoy's Kiwanis Park stands a 109-year-old statue honoring a Kickapoo chief called Wausaneta, or Etta. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. Although few know it today, the statue embodies LeRoy's longtime ties to 19th century spiritualism and the belief that the dead communicate with the living. The idea for the statue came from local resident and ardent spiritualist Simeon H. West, and he foot the bill to purchase, ship, and install this precast metal Native American and its elaborate pedestal. So one day back in late November 1905, Simeon H. West was overseeing the placement of the Grand Village of the Kickapoo historical marker. Yes, the one we had just looked at. In the midst of that day's heavy snow and howling winds, West recalled that he had an intense spiritualist encounter, later reporting that he had established a rapport with the spirits of the people who lived there at the Grand Village in the distant past. Included in this otherworldly rapport was a Kickapoo chief called Wausaneta. 7 years later, in 1912, this statue then was dedicated to this chief that Simeon H. West is communicating with through a spiritual medium. The statue gazes toward the Grand Village of the Kickapoo, which is about 7 or so miles out of LeRoy. There's the pedestal and the fountain. Wherever Simeon H. West's various travels took him, he was sure to trumpet and disseminate his West's precepts, which was kind of a 14-point program for upright living and kind-hearted care. Kind of a self-help book of its day. For instance, here's one. Quote, when you find a person on the downgrade or in the gutter, don't kick him, but help him by kind words and acts to strive for better conditions. And who could argue with that, right? The statue fountain was cast from a mold originally named number 93 Indian Chief by the J.L. Mott Ironworks of Trenton, New Jersey. And yes, there are plenty of number 53 Indian chiefs all over the country. In Cincinnati, where it's known as Tecumseh, in Calhoun, Georgia, that's what we're looking at here, where Indian chief number 53 plays Sequoia, the famous Cherokee. There's a Mohawk called Lawrence in Schenectady, New York. There's Indian chiefs number 53 in Michigan, California, and elsewhere. So no, it's not an accurate representation. As mentioned, LeRoy was and remains a center for the belief in and practice of spiritualism. James, or JT, and Elizabeth E.J. Crumbaugh, peers of Simeon West, were leading spiritualists in LeRoy in the late 19th, early 20th century. They passed away in 1905 and 1906, respectively, and provided in their will funds to build not only a spiritualist church, but also a public library, separate wings of the same building. And that's what we have today. So here's a view taken in February of the Spiritualist Church in LeRoy. And I'm going to use my arrow here. I hope you can see that. And that would be the public library. And there's a view of the JT and EJ Crumbaugh public library. So a unique arrangement, to say the least. So what does one make of this story, right? The removal of the Kickapoo, the near extirpation or annihilation of a people, 19th century spiritualism, the eccentric Simeon H. West, and all the rest, right? I think that's for the people of LeRoy and for us to kind of mull over, right? I'm going to, as I said, make no grand pronouncements or judgments on anything today. Simeon West, though, I will note, also decried the logging of old-growth stands of timber that once dotted the Grand Prairie, and so his legacy includes not only the statue we just looked at, but also a lovely 20-acre timbered tract in West Township known as West Park. And this monument at West Park reads, donated to McLean County by Simeon West on the 10th of September, 1906, for a forest reserve, and is dedicated to the lovers of forestry for all coming time. And there's a view of West Park today. It is truly one of the more beautiful spots in all of McLean County, although it's only 20 acres. There's a view of the monument, which is still standing. The monument reads on one end, quote, the groves are God's own temples. And on the other, it reads, let us worship at the shrine of nature. And you have to remember, this was erected in 1908. So Simeon West was a little out there, right, for his time, maybe for our time too. Let us now head to the Twin Cities and downtown Bloomington, though keeping on the theme of Indigenous people. Designed by Lorado Taft, one of the leading American sculptors of the 20th century, Trotter Fountain might be the most significant work of public art in all the Twin Cities. The fountain stands near the corner of East and Washington Streets in Withers Park, just south of the PNC Bank Building. And if you live in town, you know that, of course. The park is named for Withers Library, which stood at the site until it was torn down in the 1970s. This photograph showing the nearly completed fountain is signed, quote, compliments of Mr. Zimmerman to Miss Webb. Now, I had to look that up, right? Miss Webb in question is probably Nellie F. Webb, a Withers Library cataloger. Mr. Zimmerman is a Swiss-born, Mr. Zimmerman, the Swiss-born Walter Zimmerman, is one of Taft's assistants. Presumably, that's Zimmerman there in the picture, hard at work. The Pantograph reported on Mr. Zimmerman, quote, he does not speak the English language very fluently, but he is very intelligent and entertaining man to talk to. Carved from Georgia marble, the fountain's east and west sides feature Native American maidens with urns resting on their right shoulders. When the fountain is in operation, water pours from the urns to the basins. An Indian child rests at the right and left of each maiden, while the north side of the shaft features a dog or maybe a wolf, and the south a bear cub on its hind legs. Lorado Taft's signature work is the 48 feet high reinforced concrete statue known as Black Hawk, located at Loudon State Park near Oregon, Illinois, and it was dedicated the same year as the Trotter Fountain. Other well-known Taft works include Alma Mater at the University of Illinois. Bloomington's fountain is named for the Trotter family, Irish refugees of the Great Potato Famine. Dedication ceremonies took place on May 30th, 1911. At the time, the area around the fountain served as a playground of sorts for school children and children from the neighborhood. And on the off chance that Native American children might have once played at the site, really appealed to Taft's earthy romanticism. And so in his dedication address here at the site in downtown Bloomington back in 1911, Lorado Taft spoke of, quote, the sculptor's privilege to unite the ages, to reach a grateful hand to the past and a loving greeting to the future. Taft failed to account for Bloomington's notorious hard water, so yellow stains soon appeared on the stonework, forcing officials to shut down the fountain, which remained shut down for many, many years. And there's been subsequent, as we see here, deterioration of the Georgian marble just due to the extreme or difficult climate of the Midwest. Note the holiday decoration and sandbag atop this work of art. It was placed there for the 2019 holiday season, and it's been there ever since. So I really honestly don't know what to say about that. So more seriously, in Simeon West's Wausaneta statue and Lorado Taft's fountain, there's the sense, right, that Native Americans are being safely romanticized as a lost people, safely, right? Brave warriors of a long time ago, or children of nature. But the Kickapoo, as we know, remained an unconquerable people. They never went away, right? Today, there are recognized Kickapoo tribes in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and even in Mexico. In August 2019, museum staffers Susan Hartzell, Jeff Woodard, and Tori Moray traveled to the Kansas Kickapoo to attend the opening of tribal museum displays. That's Lester Randall, chairman of the tribal government. Museum staff also brought a bur oak tree as a gift. Our relationship with the Kansas Kickapoo has included visits to the museum by tribal chairman Randall and the repatriating of several documents to the Kansas Kickapoo from our archives. We then partnered with the Kansas Kickapoo in the development of a community and conflict exhibit. Chairman Randall and others were helpful in putting together this digital interactive that explores the idea of stolen land, forced resettlement, and a traumatized people. Okay, we're going to turn our attention now to Euro-American settlement. And this particular gentleman, Abraham Lincoln, it's been said that Lincoln spent more time in Bloomington than anywhere other than his hometown of Springfield from the time he becomes an attorney in the late 1830s until he leaves for Washington, D.C. in 1861 to become the nation's 16th president. He's here in Bloomington so often because Bloomington is on the 8th Judicial Circuit, and he's practicing law here for a week or more at a time in the spring and then in the fall. He's giving important political speeches here. Lincoln owns property, et cetera, et cetera. It's no wonder then that the Twin Cities has its share, and then some, of Lincoln markers, tributes, signs, and whatnot. And within 8 blocks of downtown Bloomington, we have no less than 3 statues of the 16th president. Mind you, this isn't an endorsement of such an excess, merely an acknowledgement. This, of course, is why Lincoln was here so often, practicing law in the second courthouse in McLean County's history. This nation has been preoccupied with matters of race for much of its history, a fact none surprising given the stain of slavery is woven into our nation's very fabric. In 1854, U.S. Senator Stephen A. Douglas, a Democrat from Illinois, orchestrated passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, which threatened to open slavery into heretofore free territories. So from 1854 until Lincoln's election as president in 1860, it was this issue, the extension of slavery into free Western territories, that Lincoln and Douglas clashed over time and time again, fighting over almost literally the soul of the nation. And Bloomington plays a major stage for Lincoln's maturation, grappling with the issue of slavery and its threat of disunion. In Illinois, Lincoln becomes the political and moral leader of the anti-Nebraska movement, or party, which is a fusion of disparate political groups with little in common save opposition to slavery's expansion. So Lincoln, for example, did not grow up being a Republican or an anti-Nebraska party member. He was a Whig, a Northern Whig, who, once the Whig party collapsed under the weight of slavery, fled to this anti-slavery party, which would later become known as the Republican Party. And it was here at Majors Hall at the corner of East and Front Streets in downtown Bloomington that on May 29th, 1856, that Abraham Lincoln delivers the keynote address at a political convention organizing the anti-Nebraska, soon to be known as the Republican Party. Northern states are having these conventions during the spring of 1856. So this is the stage in Illinois, Bloomington is. The speech, for reasons we don't need to get into here, we don't have the time, became known as the lost speech. So how has our community chosen to memorialize this event? The establishment of a statewide anti-slavery party. The first historical marker was placed on this building by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1918. And we see it there circled in red. Now, at this time, when this photograph was taken in 1923, Majors Hall only had 2 stories, right? Because the 3rd floor, that's where Lincoln gives his lost speech. That's where the convention is held to form the Illinois Republican Party. That's lost to fire in 1872, but they saved the rest of the building. And notice in 1923, the 1st floor of Majors Hall is a Kroger grocery. Isn't that great? So here's the Daughters of the American Revolution plaque, which was put in 1918 on the Majors Hall east wall. This tablet marks the site where Abraham Lincoln delivered his famous lost speech, May 29, 1856, placed by the Letitia Green Stevenson chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, May 29, 1918. We don't really learn a lot there, do we? Other plaques and tablets then would follow, and when Majors Hall was finally torn down in 1959 for parking, right? This is Bloomington. We're going to tear down historic structures for parking. All of the markers that had been accumulated on Majors Hall became part of a low masonry wall made of Major Hall bricks, a memorial of sorts. The old masonry assemblage has been updated. It's made of poured concrete now, so that's what we see there. Though some of the bricks were saved and used to frame the plaques and tablets, which were set in the concrete. And here's a better view of what I'm trying to describe. So at the corner of East and Front Street today, we have the Abraham Lincoln Municipal Parking deck. But we also have 6 plaques, 1 audio tour sign, and 1 wayside. Would that not be frightfully confusing for a visitor to Bloomington? I would think so. So let's look at these 6 plaques, right? We'll look at 4 first. Upper left, plaque memorializing a local attorney and a historical society president. Upper right, a representation of Majors Hall and its namesake. Lower left, birthplace of the Illinois GOP, Republican Party, and a quote from Lincoln from the Lincoln-Douglas debates at Freeport. Lower right, another significant claim to fame of Majors Hall was that it housed the earliest classes of the Normal University, what we now know as Illinois State, before the first campus building was opened in 1861. So that's 4 of the 6 plaques. Let's read look at the final 2. Upper left, generally accepted as Lincoln's concluding statement of the lost speech, quote, "We say to our Southern brethren, we won't go out of the Union and you shan't." And lower right, that's the DAR plaque from 1918. So what have we learned from all this plaquing, right? If that's a verb. That Lincoln spoke here, that what he said was lost, that something was remembered about what Lincoln said, and that the building where Lincoln said these things has since been torn down. Do we really learn anything? There is no plaque that reads, quote, "Abraham Lincoln and other Illinoisans gathered here to organize the Illinois Republican Party, which was dedicated to halting the spread of Black slavery." What's missing, in other words, is any mention of slavery or African Americans. So in many ways, when the city of Bloomington, when the residents of Bloomington made an effort to publicly commemorate the most important event to ever take place locally, important from a national perspective, we lost the fact that central to this story is the role of Black people in the great and messy American experiment to rid the nation of slavery. And we also have a plaque dedicated to Lincoln's nemesis, Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant, who as Democratic senator from Illinois was one of the most powerful political leaders in the nation in the decade leading up to the Civil War, and the architect of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The plaque, sponsored by the McLean County Historical Society, my employer, notes that Douglas served as McLean County State's Attorney in 1835, and it also includes the text of an advertisement that appeared in an 1838 issue of the first Bloomington newspaper, which was known as the Bloomington Observer and the McLean County Advocate. And in this advertisement, it notes that Douglas maintained an office in the southwest corner of the 1836 courthouse. This is what Stephen Douglas said on the McLean County Courthouse Square back in July of 1858. I believe that this government of ours was founded on the white basis. I believe that it was established by white men, men of European birth, descended of European races, for the benefit of white men and their posterity in all time to come. That was Stephen Douglas, right? This is the Douglas on the courthouse square making a speech during the 1858 Senate race. No, there was no Lincoln-Douglas debate in Bloomington, but Lincoln was in attendance this day in Bloomington. And after Douglas's speech of July 16, 1858, Lincoln was called up on the stage and asked to reply. Lincoln said, well, this is really Douglas's day, but I will return to Bloomington and make a response. And Lincoln actually did so on September 4th at the same location on the courthouse square. So in a way, you could say that there was a Lincoln-Douglas debate in Bloomington. It's just that the two debates were separated, right, by about 3 weeks' time. Douglas and the Democrats, as we see here, fell back time and time again upon the demagoguery of race. And this is actually some printable material, right? There's much that he said and much that the Democratic Party printed that I would choose not to share, right? Douglas kept asserting that the Republicans, or what he referred to as the Black Republican, were Negro lovers, whose opposition to the spread of slavery would lead to the greatest of horrors, that is race mixing, interracial marriage. This is why Douglas is being expunged from public spaces. His statue on the Illinois State Capitol grounds in Springfield was removed and placed in storage last fall, just to cite one example. His whole antebellum career, right, was based on white anxiety and racism. This plaque's dedication was a big deal, though, back in 1957, and included speeches by former Illinois governor and two-time Democratic Party presidential candidate Adlai E. Stevenson II, who grew up in Bloomington and is one of the great liberal lions of the Democratic Party of the 20th century. Also there in the center is Robert D. Douglas Jr. of Greensboro, North Carolina. He's the great-grandson of Douglas. And Illinois State Normal University President Dr. Robert Bone was also one of the speakers there that day. The Douglas being commemorated here, as far as these folks were concerned, was not the despicable racist, though, right? One would like to think, but someone who they believed was a great statesman. And when it came finally to the Civil War, an ardent unionist. This was the Douglas celebrated until recently, right, by the Democratic Party, just as the party had embraced until recently Andrew Jackson as one of their own past greats. To the right there's the view of the Douglas plaque today at the McLean County Museum of History, just off the west stairwell. The scaffolding you see there is very exciting because that represents lighting fixture restoration, which is ongoing right now. And we hope to open, folks, by April 15th, so stay tuned. Erected in 1869 and originally located in the very center of Franklin Park, this Soldiers Monument featured the names of some 700 McLean County men who died in the Civil War. The 49-foot monument featured 4 columns bearing the inscriptions of the 700 dead, and above those columns stood 4 soldiers representing infantry, cavalry, artillery, and navy, and towering over all of that was the main shaft, 18 feet in height, capped by a life-size figure of a field officer. In 1898, though, one of the figures toppled to the ground with a frightful crash, it was said. The pantograph reported that the deteriorated marble, quote, could be crumbled in the hand like sugar. 12 years later, a second soldier broke away and fell. So not surprisingly, the two remaining original figures were also in danger of falling, a threat to life and limb. And most ominous and unknown was the state of the figure way up above. So they thought it best to dismantle the monument. And if you focus in on this photograph right here, I know it's not very clear in the PowerPoint, one of the figures is already missing. So we know that this is a post-1898 view of Miller Park. County officials then ordered Old Franklin Park, its old monument, removed because it was a threat to public safety, though they saved the lower half, and this ghostly remnant now stands in the quiet Bloomington Normal neighborhood of Briarwood, where Dawes Place turns into Norbloom Avenue. Today, parts or all of several dozen names inscribed on this picturesque remnant are still legible. Those include Private Joseph Means, a farmer from Cheney's Grove in eastern McLean County, who died June 29th or June 30th, 1863 at Camp Hospital at Young's Point, Louisiana. Means was a private in Company F of the 116th Illinois Infantry Regiment, already mentioned that, which included more than 80 McLean County men, all but a few of them from Cheney's Grove. The 116th participated in some of the bloodiest battles and campaigns of the war, including Vicksburg, Chattanooga, Missionary Ridge, Atlanta, Sherman's March to the Sea. Of the company's 83 men, 26 were killed or died in the war, a fatality rate of 31%. Means, who was 2 weeks shy of his 33rd birthday when he enlisted, was married to Matilda Rankin. The couple had at least 5 children, and he marched off to war and never returned. At the dedication of the Franklin Park Soldiers Monument a few years after the Civil War, Bloomington resident Lawrence Weldon had this to say, quote, "May the sword be beaten into a plowshare and the spear into a pruning hook, and may our children dedicate monuments to the victories of peace rather than the triumphs of war." Here was the replacement monument, but not at Franklin Park, but in larger Miller Park on the west side of Bloomington, and dedicated Memorial Day, May 30th, 1913. The towering McLean County Soldiers and Sailors Monument includes 8 bronze tablets with more than 6,000 names of locals who fought from the Revolutionary War all the way up to the Spanish-American War, and that includes the Civil War. County supervisors picked a lifelong Bloomington resident, Dwight E. Frink, to design the new monument. Despite his lack of experience, the monument, I think, is a handsome triumph in a way of proportion and patriotism, a well-ordered work of public art befitting the Beaux Arts style popular at the time. The monument stands about 78 feet from grade line. Topping the monument is a 32.5-foot long shaft, a fluted Tuscan column weighing about 36 tons. And it features 3 Civil War figures cast in bronze. There is Pickett above one of the arches, a sculpture of a young soldier on the lookout. And on the opposite side is Anxiety, a captain holding field glasses. And then perched atop the shaft is the color bearer, a figure clutching a regimental flag across his chest. Frederick C. Hibbard of Chicago sculpted these 3 figures from Dwight Frink's own specifications. Hibbard's body of work is pretty wild, and it includes Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn in Hannibal, Missouri, and a host of Civil War themed works. Her pieces included the United Daughters of the Confederacy Monument at the Shiloh National Military Park in Tennessee. Yeah, there's that. Ulysses S. Grant at Vicksburg National Military Park in Mississippi, and Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln in Racine, Wisconsin. So he covered a lot of ground. So here's a look at several of the bronze plaques or tablets containing the 6,053 names. Today, the 108-year-old monument is showing some wear and tear. In addition to graffiti and missing ornamentation, there used to be 8 bronze lamps, which once flanked the archways. Those are gone. There's also a big chip in the column's upper reaches, so that's a little worrying. We're going to hone in on one of the, this would be, I think this is tablet number 6. And here we see the Civil War's 29th U.S. Colored Infantry. And we're going to go even more in. In McLean County, at least 39 African Americans enlisted in the Union Army. 26 served in the 29th Regiment Infantry U.S. Colored Troops, and 13 others enlisted in the 55th Massachusetts, one of that state's colored units. 13 of the 39 men from McLean County, or exactly 1/3, never made it home. In his 1989 rock album, New York, Lou Reed sang, quote, "Does anybody need another $1 million movie?" So I guess I'm asking the question, does anyone really need another Abraham Lincoln statue? Because as we can see here, there are plenty of them. We've got 3 in downtown Bloomington alone. This booklet, published by the Illinois State Historical Society, was written by truly one of the nicest, gentlest librarians I ever met, Carl Volkman. It was the head librarian director at the Springfield Public Library, known as Lincoln Library in downtown Springfield. And he had a love of Lincoln and sculpture works as well. So we see a long list there, and since Carl has since passed away, and since this book has been published in 2009, there have been a fair number of additional Lincoln statues, including one in our town. Here's the first of the 3 in Bloomington. V.L. Bud Fairfield, who passed away in 2009, was a Bloomington High School history teacher. He was serving as a member of the 1976 Bloomington Bicentennial Committee when he proposed the placement of a Lincoln statue in some public building in downtown Bloomington somewhere. And that was really the genesis of the first Lincoln statue. The sculptor was Keith Knobloch, a former associate professor of art at ISU who taught sculpture, drawing, and design. The second statue is known as the Lincoln Bench, sculpted by Rick Harney. Here we have the late Bloomington Mayor Judy Markowitz. She personally covered the cost of this statue in honor of her family, the Stearns, who played a large role in the business life of Bloomington for many years. This Rick Harney designed work was then given to the city of Bloomington for the 150th anniversary of its incorporation as a municipality. That was back in the summer of 2000. Some of us remember this sesqui with an exclamation mark, the sesqui celebration. Originally located on the east side of the courthouse, now the Museum Square, it's been since relocated to the reconfigured main entrance on the south side of the square off Washington Street. Sculptor Rick Harney also created the John Wesley Powell statue at Ames Library at Illinois Wesleyan University, the Adlai E. Stevenson statue at Central Illinois Regional Airport, which I had a whole series of wonderful slides, but I had to cut due to time, and other works as well. The most recent, or third Lincoln sculpture, is that 50? Okay. Includes Judge David Davis and Normal's leading citizen, Jesse Fell. Both men played significant roles in supporting Lincoln's political ambitions. This work stands in Lincoln Park, fronting the Bloomington Center for Performing Arts in downtown Bloomington, and it was the project of the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission of McLean County, with support from the city of Bloomington and the town of Normal. The bicentennial here meaning the bicentennial of Lincoln's birth. The sculptor was Andrew Jumonville of Bloomington. And we'll take one last look at Andrew's work. In the years after the Civil War, the town of Normal, thanks in part to the efforts of one Jesse Fell, became home to a small community of formerly enslaved people. Some even became homeowners. Simon B. Malone, for example, was one. He was born into slavery in 1842 in Mississippi. He was 20 years old when, with the arrival of the Ohio Cavalry during the Civil War, he liberated himself and he eventually enlisted in the Union Army. In 1867, 2 years after the war, he married Julia E. Dillon, and the two settled in Normal. Malone held various jobs in the Twin Cities, including teamster and town of Normal pound master, the latter a position involving the care and feeding of stray livestock, or perhaps even stray dogs as well. Malone built a two-story wood frame house on the 500 block of Kingsley Street in Normal, and he's buried in the Civil War soldiers' plot in the Old City section of what's today Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. Sadly, the Malone house was lost to arson in the fall of 1981. And the following year, Normal erected a Human Relations Commission marker at the site to commemorate the first house in Normal built by an African American. But this marker no longer stands. So that's an issue that probably could be rectified, I think. Born in 1865 into slavery, Fanny Walker moved to Normal with her family in 1881. 2 years later, she would marry a contractor, Peter Duff, who was once enslaved himself, who came to Normal in 1870 and worked as a carpenter and a handyman for Jesse Fell. Peter purchased land from Fell. Fell was one of the few people in McLean County who would sell property to Black people, and he built a new home at 107 West Poplar Street in Normal. Fanny and Peter had 7 children, including Alberta, John Walker, and Julia. As museum curator Susan Hartzold noted in a recent Panagraph article, quote, though all the Duff children finished high school, local racist attitudes limited their employment opportunities. So this is one of the great tragedies in Bloomington Normal history, is we had a small but vibrant Black community, and these Black children would be educated, often at the Normal University, but there was no gainful employment for them. Even to be a school teacher, they had to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, or for Chicago, Illinois, or Indianapolis, or East St. Louis. The brain drain, right? Would be a much different community today if these people would have stayed and raised families of their own. The remarkable story of Normal's 19th century Black community, a look back at what could have been, a glimpse at the promise of this nation and its professed ideals, one might think is worthy of more significant or permanent commemoration. I said I wasn't really going to make any recommendations, but that would be one. If I was going to make a recommendation, would be one. This is a subject worthy of a return. At the southwest corner of the courthouse square near the intersection of Center and Washington Street stands a historic marker of brick topped by a bronze plaque. Well, let's see what we have here. Center Street site, it reads, first brick pavement in the United States. Innovation to modern highways, installed 1877. Wow, that's impressive. Bloomington had the first brick pavement in the United States. Unfortunately, the claim of first is just not true. This well-worn myth has been around for nearly a century, if not a little bit longer. Though as oftentimes is the case with local legends and lore, there is some truth to the story. The plaque correctly states that Napoleon B. Heifer installed a stretch of brick pavement in 1877, and it's mostly correct that this represented an innovation in modern highways, though instead of highways, I would use the word streets. I know I'm running late, so let me wrap up here in the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you for your patience. This plaque was presented to the city of Bloomington in the spring of 1968 by Bloomington Junior High School educators and students, and it was part of a school project timed with the Illinois Sesquicentennial observance. So this is likely why I think, because this marker has a connection to school kids, that no one has bothered to take a cold, hard look at it, let alone remove it. And I'm not calling for the removal of this by any means. But it does help when you get some snow and you don't have to bother with the problematic context there, right? Another factual error on the Center Street plaque is the claim that the plaque itself is set in original paving brick. The bricks are actually shale pavers produced many, many years after the 1877 experiment. So what's kind of funny or not so funny is about 15 years ago, vandals chipped away at the mortar and removed several bricks, believing perhaps that they were now in possession of valuable pieces of U.S. history. One would like to think that the local history gods got a good laugh at this sad case of petty thievery. At the north entrance to Redbird Arena on the ISU campus is a statuary pairing of William J. Will Robinson and Doug Collins, the coach and superstar, respectively, of the early 1970s ISU men's basketball team. Coach Will Robinson became the first Black head coach in NCAA Division I basketball history when he accepted the job at ISU in 1970. This is an incredible story. He remained in Normal for 5 seasons and became a talent scout for the NBA Detroit Pistons and the NFL Detroit Lions. The statue is a gift of the Frankie family. The sculptor, Lou Sella, is a 1985 graduate of ISU himself. And this pairing was unveiled in 2009. Of course, Doug Collins, who was from rural downstate Benton, all white Benton. So you had this pairing of Collins and Robinson, which also makes for a wonderful story. Doug Collins played in the 1972 U.S. Olympic men's basketball team, was the first pick in the 1973 NBA draft and a 4-time NBA All-Star, and has now spent several decades as an NBA head coach and color analyst. Coach Robinson passed away in 2008 at the age of 96. Last summer, I was contacted by a 17-year-old student from New Jersey to provide information on the Wereth 11 Memorial at Miller Park. And my first thought was, Wereth 11? I don't know what that is, and I'm not familiar with the memorial. This marker, dedicated in 2016, thanks to the efforts of the late Marine Corps and Vietnam veteran Dale Mills, you see him there, commemorates 11 Black American soldiers who were massacred by the German SS during World War II's Battle of the Bulge. There is no known local connection to the Wereth 11, but Dale felt it was important to recognize their sacrifices. After taking that call from the 17-year-old student from New Jersey, I then fielded a call from someone in their 90s, a 90-year-old Christian DeMarkin of Worcester, Massachusetts, who was instrumental in seeing to the erection of an earlier Wereth 11 memorial at the Massachusetts Veterans Memorial Cemetery. So they were just stunned that there was actually another marker in the United States to the Wereth 11. So a fascinating story few were familiar with, and it's a shame that Dale isn't around to kind of help us guide us through this story and his passion for it. As we wrap up here, and again, thanks for your patience, let's look at 2 memorials or markers in which the McLean County Museum of History played a role in seeing to completion. The positive role we can play as a cultural institution. In Funk's Grove Cemetery, south of Bloomington, there is a 6-foot Celtic Cross marking a mass grave of more than 50 Irish railroad workers who died during the construction of the Alton and Sangamon, later known as the Chicago and Alton Railroad, from Springfield to Bloomington. Cemetery records simply noted, quote, Irish workers over 2 large plots. So this was dedicated in the spring of 2000. Irish Americans from Central Illinois and labor unions, with the help of the McLean County Museum of History, raised the $20,000 necessary for the erection of this monument. And the wording is quite beautiful, and I'll just read a part of it. Quote, this Celtic cross honors the memory of more than 50 souls buried here in the early 1850s. These immigrants from Ireland were driven from the land of their birth by famine and disease. They arrived sick and penniless and took hard and dangerous jobs building the Chicago and Alton Railroad. Known but to God, they rest here in individual anonymity, far from the old homes of their heirs, yet forever short of the new homes of their hopes. Dedication Day speakers included the Honorable Eamon Hickey, Consul General from the Republic of Ireland, and a resource-rich history book, Irish Immigrants in McLean County, Illinois, edited by Greg Coos and published by the museum in 2000, was an offshoot of this memorial project. So you had real legitimate local historical research that was kind of a gift of this program, if you will. And of course, a lot of you are familiar with the role that the museum played in the recent erection of an Illinois State Historical Society marker commemorating the fact that Bloomington had racially segregated public beaches into the 1950s. So the story begins in 1908 at the behest of complaints from white citizens of Bloomington. The Miller Park commissioners established racially segregated public beaches. And this was part of a pattern in the early 20th century. What ISU Distinguished Professor of History Emeritus, Dr. Mark Wyman, has called Jim Crow Comes to Central Illinois, that access to public accommodations, political and civil rights, the freedom and liberties enjoyed by African Americans in the North took a turn for the worse in the early decades of the 20th century. Again, Jim Crow comes to Central Illinois. Miller Park is actually two lakes, and alas, this geographic division really benefited the park commissioners who wanted to create two separate but wholly unequal public beaches. So in the large reservoir, you had a sandy beach, and in the lagoon, you had what one Black resident protested as a weed-grown hole of stagnant water with very little sand. And this disgraceful arrangement remained in place for decades and also led to the death of Phyllis Hogan, a 6-year-old girl who drowned at the African-American beach in the summer of 1948 because she was swimming on a Monday, the day that the colored beach was closed and without a lifeguard. We have a whole series of aerial photographs, and I wanted to see if we could find an aerial photograph of the Black Beach, and we have it here. So let's enlarge this particular undated photo, and there we get a good view of the Black Beach. As late as August 1950, the McLean County Health Department recommended to Bloomington Mayor Cecil Cone that toilets used by Black swimmers, which were little more than outhouses, be connected to the city's sewer system. So they were separate facilities and they were grotesquely unequal. And as I said, the beaches were not integrated until the 1950s. Dr. Mark Wyman and the McLean County Museum of History were driving forces behind the September 20th, 2018 dedication of the Illinois State Historical Society marker, noting segregation of beaches at Miller Park. The museum also partnered with the city of Bloomington, the Bloomington Normal NAACP, and Not in Our Town, Bloomington Normal. Speakers at the dedication included 84-year-old Phyllis Jean Hogan, lower right with the white hat, who swam at the Black Beach, Quincy Cummins, then president of the local chapter of the NAACP, and the Reverend Dr. Bridget A. Black, pastor of Wayman AME. A great nation does not hide its history. It faces its flaws and corrects them, noted Dr. Mark Wyman at this dedication. By dedicating this historical marker, we are helping uncover a community secret. That secret is this: Bloomington and Normal were held in the grip of racial segregation for the first half of the 20th century and beyond. So this marker is an expression of healing in many ways. And as we are truly ending, I wanted to bring up a few potential candidates for memorialization or to get you thinking about possibilities, because there's so much history here, so rich history that has not been institutionally memorialized at this point. Look at Rachael Crothers. Born and raised in Bloomington, the youngest of 8 children from the remarkable family of doctors Eli and Marie Louise Crothers. Rachael Crothers was a leading dramatist of American theater, and she was the most successful, critically and commercially, female playwright on Broadway in the first decades of the 20th century, a position she held until the coming of Lillian Hellman, right? Crothers served as her own manager and agent and even produced some of her own plays on the New York stage, most of which revolved around the tension arising from a woman's search for independence in our patriarchal world. Quote, if you want to see the sign of the times, watch women, Crothers said in 1912. Their evolution is the most important thing in modern life. Several of her plays were successfully adapted to the silver screen, including Susan and God in 1940, starring Joan Crawford and Rita Hayworth. Her work is sophisticated and sharp, holds up well today. Sadly, she's mostly forgotten around these parts. One would think that this community ought to embrace her life and career in some way. If there is to be such a conversation in this community, other names, events, locations as candidates for memorialization would sure to come up. For instance, let's take a look at the McLean County Home for Colored Children, established in 1918 and renamed the Booker T. Washington Home in 1942. It was located at the 1200 block of West Moulton Street, which is MacArthur Avenue today. The home's most famous graduate, if you will, is Elizabeth Louise Betty Ebo. She was sent to the McLean County Home for Colored Children in 1930, along with her two siblings. As a young girl, she became drawn to the Catholic faith. She applied to Bloomington's St. Joseph School of Nursing, but was denied entrance because she was Black. Like so many other young Black residents full of potential, she left the Twin Cities for meaningful employment, first to the St. Mary's Infirmary School of Nursing for Negroes in St. Louis, and then the Sisters of St. Mary's, where she became a novice or nun. She took the name Sister Mary Antonia in honor of the sister who taught her algebra and geometry at Holy Trinity School in Bloomington. Here we see when she was 6 years old, she created this signature block for the Bloomington Normal Domestic Science Club, and we have this quilt in our collections. Ebo is one of 6 nuns known as the Sisters of Selma because they stood front and center during the Civil Rights March onto the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965. She was asked why she came to Alabama to march with the Reverend Martin Luther King, and she said, quote, I'm here because I'm a Negro, a nun, a Catholic, and because I want to bear witness. Sister Mary Ebo passed away in 2017 at the age of 93. In closing, one could make a case that local government should consider conducting surveys of existing public memorials and statues and monuments and plaques and all that similar stuff in order that they might determine what may or may not pose problems and to determine what gaps, such as unrepresented groups, exist. Such a survey could be conducted by local officials in partnership, of course, with residents, students, community leaders, activists, and educators. This could be done in Bloomington or McLean County or LeRoy or wherever one determines such a need is unmet. Once such a survey is completed, parsed, debated, and revised, it could then help point the way forward. So thank you very much for your time, and I apologize for going a little over the time.
Thank you very much, Bill. And so now we have some questions in the Q&A. So I will read through those, and please feel free, everyone, if you have more questions, please keep adding them to the Q&A and we will take a few moments to answer them. So our first question, the Pantograph has provided much documentation of our history. What will be our sources in the future?
Well, that's a phenomenal question, and librarians and archivists are struggling with that all the time. Look at the COVID-19 pandemic and how institutions such as the McLean County Museum of History are collecting those stories, right? We're not only doing it through oral history, through journaling, through collection of flyers and paper ephemera, but we're also, with the help of our curator of digital humanities, Tori Moray, we're looking at Facebook posts. We're looking at websites. We're capturing pages because that's where so much communication is occurring today, right? That is, in the Civil War era, you're going to look at letters sent from soldiers to the home front and vice versa. If you're going to look at the COVID-19 pandemic, in 40 or 50 or a century from now, you're probably going to be looking at Facebook posts. So we are digitally capturing a lot of that communication. So that's one example. I hope that answers the question there.
Excellent. The next question, if the state granted you 3 plaque memorials, which sites would you pick? And you kind of already answered them, but go ahead.
Yeah, so again, I'm not in the position, nor would I want to be, to make such a determination. I bring nothing really to the table other than an interest in local history. I think those are issues that the community has to grapple with. You know, I did, as Candace said, I did bring up a few names: Rachael Crothers, Betty Ebo. There are others as well, but you know, and there are other events, individuals, organizations. Dr. Mark Wyman, for example, is looking at another Illinois State Historical Society marker, this one to be placed near the Illinois State University campus to memorialize the fact that African-American students were protesting what we now know as uptown normal businesses that would not allow or serve Black students. This happened after World War II. So Mark this is in the very early stages, but Mark and I and others hope to have something finished within the next few years on that front.
All right. And plaques seem popular because they last a long time. What would be better, or what is coming new in historical markers?
That's a good question. People often don't wrestle with the issue of durability, right? As we saw with the Simon Malone marker, right? That had basically fancy 2x4s holding it up. So that was not built to last in the Midwest or basically anywhere else. So plaques are still the go-to. Because of their ability to withstand, you know, all sorts of weather. So you are seeing the introduction of digital outdoor interactives. You know, the jury is certainly out on those.
Excellent question here. Why are there names on the Miller Park Monument from the Revolutionary War? Illinois was not in the Revolution at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, right? But we did have people that settled here that were veterans of the Revolutionary War. But even so, right, McLean County is not founded until late 1830. So the Revolutionary War veterans that are coming to McLean County are already very aged. So, but there are, Candace, do you know how many? There's at least a dozen or so.
Something like that. And there's one buried at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. There's one in the cemetery in LeRoy. I have seen that marker. So yeah, there's at least a dozen. It's kind of scattered throughout McLean County. I think the Genealogical Society may have a record.
We do have a file on. We have a pretty extensive file on Revolutionary War veterans or people that claim to be veterans who are buried. A similar question is, yes, we do have Confederate veterans or soldiers from the Civil War that then moved to McLean County and are buried here. So there is, again, about a dozen or so Confederate veterans that are buried in McLean County.
Another question. While the generic Native American statues seem sort of crude and problematic, given that they seem well-intentioned, should they be removed in your opinion?
Yeah, so again, I don't mean to play politician, but I don't think it's not really my decision. This is a decision for the town of LeRoy. And again, I would just encourage people to look at these issues with all the complexity and the nuance they really deserve, right? You do need to place statuary and monuments in some sort of context and understanding. But if things are hurtful, they are hurtful, right? And if they are hateful, they are hateful. So we also need to address those face on. So what to do with something like this? That's an excellent question.
So if people weren't aware, there is a proposed circus statue possibly being placed in downtown. And one person would like to know if we know what the status of that circus YMCA memorial monument that was to be placed at the corner of Front and East Street is.
Yeah, no, I don't know the status. Candace, you might have more connection to the circus community than I do.
So last I heard, they did get approval from the county board to get the base going, but then COVID happened. And so I think that kind of put plans on hold because the base was supposed to be put in first. And then Andrew Jumonville had been commissioned to work on the sculpture, but I don't know the current status of when that will be happening, all just because, you know, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So hopefully it's still going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Really good question. Another one. Elbert Hubbard was born in Bloomington. At one time, he was the most famous man in America. Is there any commemorative monument or plaque to him?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a few things. There is I believe, a plaque, boulder plaque in Hudson. And there is also the Hubbard Gate, which is in great disrepair at Lake Bloomington. Which also memorializes in some way, because there's a bench there, Melville Stone, which is another Hudson resident, and a third person as well that I'm forgetting. So in the Hudson area in Lake Bloomington, there are at least two things that remember the wildly eccentric and always interesting Elbert Hubbard. And that who's ever asking that question can email me. And I can track that information down for them gladly.
I will put your email address in the chat box. That way they can email you. Another question. This one could be deeper than we have time to answer. So what is the context around African Americans in the community? What was happening in the world around? Was it just a Bloomington normal matter? Locals against? What was other groups struggling with the same discrimination?
So the questions about why this happened in Bloomington in the early 20th century,
Yeah.
or
yes, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there are many factors that came into play. We tend to think in the United States, right, that the history, the arc of history, right, leans toward progress, right, that things are always improving. But as we've seen at times, we've taken steps back, and one step we did take back as a nation was in the early 20th century. The example we like to use in Bloomington is with the Fisk Jubilee Singers. The Fisk Jubilee Singers were from Fisk College, now Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, a historically Black college and university. And the Fisk Jubilee Singers traveled the country popularizing Black church gospel music to white audiences. And when the Fisk Jubilee Singers came to Bloomington in the 1880s, they stayed at the finest hotel in Bloomington and were welcomed with open arms, as they should have been. They stayed at the Ashley House, or later the Windsor Hotel. But by the 1920s and 1930s, when, say, Cab Calloway or Duke Ellington, one of the greatest artists in 20th century world history, right, come to Bloomington to perform, they are not allowed to stay at any of the hotels in downtown Bloomington. Jim Crow comes to Central Illinois. The same with public accommodations. This was occurring throughout the North, right? And in Central Illinois, in communities like Peoria, Springfield, Champaign-Urbana, Decatur. Some of this had to do with World War II, returning soldiers, Black soldiers, competition for industrial jobs, the great Black migration from the South, creating tensions in the North, from the frustrations of Blacks themselves being treated as second-class citizens, and fighting up against that wall and creating antagonisms. So there are many things involved in that.
That could be a whole program in itself.
And it actually is. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And the last is more of a comment about the Kickapoo, is that they fought on the side of the British during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, the Kickapoo are phenomenal people. They were very culturally conservative, very protective of their lifeways. They had wanted nothing to do, for example, with Euro-American livestock, right? And a lot of Euro-American trade goods. But they would take advantage of what they could, for example, firearms, right? So they tenaciously fought whoever was their primary enemy. So initially it was the British, and then later it became the Americans, because they truly saw the Americans, the land-hungry American settler, as their existential threat. So yes, they did side with the British. And they remained in antagonism to the U.S. government into the early 20th century, and for good reasons.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have. So thank you all for joining us. Oh, one more popped in the chat. Oops, where'd it go? One last question. Will there ever be a monument, plaque, or marker placed at the train station depot area in Bloomington where Lincoln's body passed in May 1865 on his last train ride?
So the funeral train of Abraham Lincoln, it's actually its last stop to take on wood and water, of all things, was in Bloomington. No, there is no marker to the funeral train stop in Bloomington. The person's asking that, when will there be one? Well, I guess I would ask the person asking that question, you know, therein is a letter to the editor, or a letter to city council, or a presentation you can make, or a Facebook page you could create to get the ball rolling.
Excellent. Excellent. Oh, and just one more final comment. Love the program. Bill at his best. There we go. A great comment to end on tonight. And I hope that people will join us next Tuesday on the 30th at 7 o'clock. We're going to see yours truly right here, debuting my program, Artists, Advocates, Acrobats, and More, Women Who Made McLean County History. It's very hard to choose just 20 women and then only talk about said 20 women for like 3 minutes each, but it'll give you a nice flavor of some of the diverse women who have made history from all walks of life in our community. And you can go to our website, click on the link to sign up for that Zoom, or I dropped it in the chat here as well. So I hope you can come back next Tuesday and join us for that. And I hope everyone has a nice evening. Thank you again so much. Be safe and be well.